The Love That Dances by Enchanted Tales Hub. In a quiet little bedroom, on the second shelf of a rosewood dresser, sat a music box shaped like a miniature theater. Its lid was curved like a stage curtain, its inside lined with velvet, and in its center stood a tiny ballerina, motionless by day, perfect in her pink tutu and delicate slippers. She belonged to a little girl who adored ballet, though lately, the girl was more distracted by school books and blinking screens than toys on her shelf. Still, she never moved the box. It stayed right where it had always been, collecting moonlight and a little dust. But there was something magical about this music box. A quiet enchantment that stirred only when the rest of the world had gone still. You see, every night when the clock struck 12, not a second before or after, the gears inside the box would tremble with life, and the ballerina would awaken. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The moment the 12th chime rang, her limbs softened from porcelain to grace. Her arms unfurled like silk ribbons, and with a small leap, she stepped out of her music box onto the wooden surface of the dresser. For the next 3 hours, she was free. She never wandered far. Her favorite place was always the window, just across the room, always slightly ajar. There, she would climb up the curtain cord and sit on the sill, her tiny legs dangling into the starlit air. She loved the stars. Every night, she looked up as if seeing them for the very first time. The sky never changed, and yet it always offered her something new, a flickering pattern, a drifting cloud, the shape of the moon as it changed over the weeks. She didn't long for more. She didn't wonder why her freedom ended at 3 or why she never spoke. In those 3 hours, with the wind brushing her face and the hush of the house behind her, she felt whole. And when the clock neared 3, she would always return. With soft, graceful steps, she'd climb back into her box, tuck herself into her frozen pose, and close her eyes, not from sadness, but from peace. Because for her, even a few hours of quiet wonder was enough. And so the nights continued like this. 3 hours of life, 3 hours of stars, and a ballerina who danced alone in the silence, never waiting, never wishing, just quietly alive beneath the moon. One evening, just before sunset, something new arrived in the room. The little girl who owned the ballerina had brought home a second music box, a gift, it seemed, though she didn't say from whom. She placed it right beside the first one, where the ballerina usually stood alone. This box was different, darker wood, polished edges, and trimmed in tiny silver stars. And inside it stood a figure she had never seen before. It was a boy, a dancer like her. He wore a blue jacket with golden threads, arms arched gently above his head, his posture proud and still. His face was kind, carved with care, and his painted eyes seemed to look not at the ceiling, but at her. That night, as the clock struck 12, the air stirred once more with magic. The ballerina opened her eyes and rose as she always did, ready to take her quiet journey to the window. But this time, she hesitated. Something was different. She turned her head, just slightly, and saw him. The boy in the box blinked, then shifted. Slowly, almost cautiously, he stepped down from his pedestal. His joints moved as if waking from a long sleep. He looked around the room with curiosity, the shelves, the desk, the dust motes floating like ghosts in moonlight. And then he saw her. She had not moved, not a step. She stood beside her own box, half hidden in its shadow, watching him the way you might watch a raindrop fall for the first time, stunned, silent, a little afraid to blink. Their eyes met. He smiled, soft and unsure, then bowed, a real bow, just like dancers do on stage. And with a gentle gesture, he held out his hand. The ballerina's heart, though it had never once beat, suddenly felt full. Shyly, she stepped forward. Her hand rose, trembling with wonder, and rested in his. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They began to dance. Not in circles or practiced moves, but something slow and quiet, a duet written by instinct. Their feet moved across the wooden dresser as if it were a stage of clouds, their shadows stretching out toward the window, toward the stars. For the first time in all her midnight hours, she wasn't alone. And when the clock chimed 3, they paused, breathless in silence. They looked into each other's eyes one last time, and then with a silent promise, returned to their separate boxes. Back to stillness. Back to waiting. But now the night held something new, a second dancer. A quiet joy, and a reason for her heart to hope again. For many nights after their first dance, the 2 music box dolls came alive with the chime of midnight and danced beneath the stars. Sometimes they twirled across the dresser. Sometimes they simply sat at the window, legs swinging, hands resting in one another's. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. Their glances, their smiles, their closeness said everything. And then, things changed. It started with voices. Louder, colder. The little girl and the person who had given her the second music box, her brother, perhaps, or someone who used to come over more often, began to argue. Not the kind of small arguments that pass like wind, but the kind that stay in a room even after the words are gone. Their laughter vanished. Their footsteps grew heavy. And slowly, the ballerina and the boy began to feel it too. One night, the clock struck 12, but neither doll moved. The ballerina stayed inside her box, hands folded. The boy didn't bow, didn't reach for her hand. They listened to the silence, afraid of what might be coming. If the people who had brought them together were going to part, wouldn't that mean they'd be separated too? The thought was too sharp to speak aloud. So they didn't speak at all. Night after night, they stayed still. Even as the magic awakened their limbs, even as the window glowed with moonlight, they refused to move. Their owners noticed. They wound the boxes, gently at first, then more eagerly. But no music played, no spinning, no dance. The dolls remained frozen, as if sleeping too deeply to wake. And though the owners didn't understand, they didn't throw them away. They were kind. They still believed in repair. So one day, both boxes were placed carefully into a soft cloth bag and taken across town to a small, cluttered shop filled with ticking clocks and tiny tools. The man who owned it had white hair, sharp eyes, and hands that knew how to fix things most people thought unfixable. He opened the boxes, listened to their silence, checked every gear, every pin. Nothing was broken. He didn't say anything. He just waited. And when midnight came and the chime echoed through the shadows of his little shop, he stood still and watched. The ballerina moved first slowly, like someone rising from sorrow. The boy followed. They didn't dance. They stood side by side, holding each other's hands like lifelines. Their painted eyes met the old man's, and without a single word, he understood everything. They told him their story, with gestures, with sorrow, with the silence that had wrapped around them. He listened the way a clock listens to time, patiently, completely. When they were done, he smiled, not the kind of smile that fixes things, but the kind that believes they can be fixed. "Don't worry," he said with a nod. "I have an idea." And in the soft ticking of that little shop, hope stirred once more. A few quiet days passed in the clockmaker's shop. The ballerina and the boy stayed close, seated on the edge of his work table, hands still twined, eyes no longer weighed down by fear. The old man didn't rush. He tinkered and hummed, whistled old lullabies, and occasionally gave the dolls a knowing glance. And then one afternoon, he made a phone call. Just a short one. Later that evening, the two owners arrived together. They stepped into the shop hesitantly, unsure of what to expect, and when they looked down at the counter, they blinked in surprise. Instead of two separate music boxes, there was one. Larger than before, shaped like a grand ballroom under glass, this new box shimmered with gold detailing and a painted sky on its inner lid. Inside, in the center of a polished circular stage, stood the ballerina and the boy together. The old man smiled and opened the lid. At first, there was only silence. And then, the soft hum of music, a melody like a secret being remembered. And the dancers began to move. They spun, not mechanically, but like two hearts in rhythm, gracefully, gently, with smiles so small and full of meaning that even the humans watching forgot to breathe for a moment. The owners looked at each other, not just at the dolls, but truly at one another. And in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. A memory, maybe, or a promise. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They simply thanked the old man, cradled the music box between them, and left the shop side by side. Back in the bedroom, the new box was placed where the old ones had stood. But now the stage was shared. The magic no longer divided. And when midnight came, the chime sounded once more. The ballerina and the boy awakened, not in loneliness, but in light. They danced every night, not for escape, not for waiting, but because they could. Because they had each other. Because they had been chosen to stay. And in that quiet room, under the watchful stars, the music box played and the two dancers moved forever hand in hand.